Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in and good night, should I say. It is 10:29 p.m. here on the East Coast, and it is 70 degrees outside. Beautiful weather. Beautiful weather. Too bad we got to break some breaking news to y'all. We have breaking news coming out of Iran, and also we have breaking news coming out of Russia and Ukraine, and also we have news coming out of Washington. We have some crazy footage of Russia, taking massive damage to their navy. My bad. Just gonna drink a Pepsi, y'all. But anyways, like I was saying earlier, or last night on the show, that Russia is not going to be able to keep up, lugging on the war like it has been. It's going to have to either go with diplomacy, or it's going to have to take a step further than what it's already done already. And what it's done already is a little crazy, a little. If you want my aspect of it, of the war crimes that he's actually committed, is ferocious. And whenever this war is done, he definitely should be trialed as or should be trialed for these war crimes, should I say? Because it is massive what kind of attacks and stuff they are doing to Ukraine. Like I said, you don't want to miss tonight's show. We got some crazy news coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. That way we can get all the news today, because it's going to be a little bit of a long one. It's probably going to be about a little bit of an hour or so, or a little bit longer tonight. So hopefully we can get through everything that we got. Let me pull this up for y'all so y'all can see. All them green dots is news from the past 24 hours, and that is breaking news that is coming out. So we are going to keep y'all up to date about what's going on, but we are going to go ahead with the show. We do have live call-ins tonight, y'all. 540-251-7687. If y'all want to call in and give a shout out to your loved ones, or just go ahead and chat about the show, go ahead and give a call. The phone lines will be open momentarily right now. The phone lines are open now. So 540-251-7687. And I will put that up on top so y'all can see that for yourself as well. Oh, my bad. Sorry about that.
That apparently another Russian Navy vessel has been targeted with an attack, and it looks like it took some serious damage, and we have that on video as well. We've also heard that Poland has closed its airspace near Belarus, near the border, over recent threats, and it'll be remaining closed into the immediate future. And also, we are getting word that U.S. officials have just issued a warning of hostilities possibly restarting with Iran very soon, and we have very big news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're recovering the past 24 hours of the news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments in the Middle East and Eastern Europe over the course of the past 24 hours. Major news has emerged that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing major strikes against Russian naval forces and Russian naval ships around the area of Crimea, and devastating damage has been proven on the Staragushi-class corvette, the Boyki, which was in dry dock at the Kronstadt Naval Facility outside of the city of St. Petersburg, with the entirety of the superstructure being confirmed to have largely been destroyed or heavily damaged in the midst of the raging raging inferno that apparently ate through the ship over the course of several hours. Additionally, we've also been able to see that Poland has now declared that they will be shutting down their airspace for what appears to be the indefinite future, until such a time is decided otherwise, as the Polish Republic is stating that for state security reasons, they must close this airspace in the eventuality of a further escalation of the growing tensions with the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. And not only that, the Polish are also stating that the prevalence of possible drone attacks is becoming a lot more likely, possibly citing the drone incursions into Baltic states and Romania as their example. We've also been able to hear additionally that the Russian Federation is continuing to see significant losses of supply and material resources behind the front lines due to long-range Ukrainian drone attacks striking and destroying Russian supply trucks along the main highways in the occupied territories, with attacks being reported all the way from Mariupol to Dzhankoy and all the way from Mariupol to Orlivka. We've also been able to confirm that Ukrainian attacks attempted to hit and successfully destroyed a large number of supply depots within Luhansk and Donetsk over the course of the night, and we've also been able to see that a supply depot in Volodyrsk, just to the east of Orlivka, was also hit and heavily damaged as well. We've also heard that the Russian Federation has additionally announced that their Oreshnik IRBM that was fired at Ukraine that fell short and actually landed inside of Russian-occupied territory didn't do that by accident. It was a deliberate plan by Russia to almost hit their own forces with an IRBM because they wanted to see the results and really look at the cooking going on in the kitchen. Suffice to say, they weren't really pleased. The Ukrainians have also inflicted significant losses onto the Russian Federation's armed forces over the course of the day as well, and have stopped most, if not all, frontline advances, and have largely kept the frontline momentum in their favor. Outside of that news in Europe, we've also been able to hear that within the Middle East, additional news has started to emerge as the United States is now once again issuing warnings to U.S. citizens within the Middle East that they need to ensure that they have shelter nearby and accessible in case of the event of larger Iranian attacks that may begin at any moment. Significant U.S. airlifts are still being conducted right now at a high volume into the Middle East and out of the Middle East, which may be suggesting the additional movement of equipment and resources into the area or the movement of equipment and resources out of the area. It's a little bit unclear at the moment. We have not been able to get satellite footage to corroborate exactly what is going on, whether it's an increase in force or decrease in force, but we can note the high airlifts currently being conducted into CENTCOM's AOR. Additionally, we've also been able to see that the President of the United States has now once again changed the foreign policy directives once again and has now stated that Iran getting a nuclear weapon and keeping their near weapons-grade enriched uranium is now no longer an issue, and he would be in fact honored to meet the supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei. We've also been able to hear additionally that something is on fire on a UAE island within the Persian Gulf, and we've also been able to hear that Israel has been conducting airstrikes throughout southern Lebanon, and the Iranians have threatened Israel that if they continue strikes on Lebanon, that will be a violation of the ceasefire and they will restart the war unilaterally against the state of Israel. According to some U.S. officials, Netanyahu is adamant on returning to the conflict and continuing the war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and apparently some U.S. officials say he just doesn't know when to quit. I would say that the U.S. doesn't really know when to quit either, but in another way. Nevertheless, we have a significant amount of news to cover over the past 24 hours, not only including all of our news in the Middle East, but a little bit of news out of the U.S. Congress today. But we're going to be covering each and every single bit of this, starting with our largest stories first, and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. And suffice to say, we have quite a lot of news today, much like many other days, on our news coverage over the past couple of months. Moving us on into the major news that we have, we are going to be moving immediately and into the area of the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula has been the point of a major amount of stories that have been unfolding recently, including the continued attacks that we've seen against Russian Federation armed forces of the air and naval varieties around the area of the city of Sevastopol. Sevastopol is an important staging and operational area for the Russian armed forces based out of the Crimean Peninsula, as they are able to vector a large amount of indirect fire support either by the Russian ships at sea or by the aircraft at Katya and Belbek airfields to be able to try and give some support to the Russian infantry, which are still struggling years later to make any progress on the front lines just south of the city of Zaporizhia and across the banks of the Dnipro River. Ukrainian armed forces have considered this area for that reason a high priority target target to be able to hit and destroy the vital aircraft and multi-role platforms at Kacha and Belbek airfields, and to also continue to hit the remaining combatant and support forces of the Russian Black Sea Fleet that are based out of the port of Sevastopol. A large amount of these attacks take intermittent or rotational styled attacks and strategies, with some attacks attempting to clear out the coastal defense and air defense forces that the Russian Federation has based around the city, and then the follow-up attacks in the prior days or the following days generally attempt to attack and destroy the actual vital components and assets that the Russians have that are based out of the city of Sevastopol and its surrounding periphery. Today, it appears that Ukraine has largely attempted to target, much like they were yesterday, the air defense forces and coastal defense forces around Sevastopol, which is already giving us a clear understanding that an attack window is being opened up for Ukraine due to the fact that Russia will not have as much defensive fire available, at least conventional defensive fire, to put up against Ukrainian drones and missiles, which are mostly going to be launched at the city once more within the next several weeks. Today, the Ukrainians have decided that the Russian Navy's coastal defense forces are the top priority, and we were also able to see that this Svitsyok-class patrol boat, the Project 10410, was precisely hit by a Ukrainian drone attack over the course of the day, which is conducting coastal patrols and air defenses around the outskirts of the city of Sevastopol at sea. Here's the clip showing that incoming drone making its mark, and then also continuing to hit the air defense forces around Crimea.
That was a pretty bad hit right there. It hit right on the side of that patrol ship. And also, you said this one was patrolling near Sevastopol, you say?
Yes, this one was actually patrolling near Sevastopol. And to show you all this really quickly, this is actually an interesting thing about the Ukrainian Post, is that they actually geolocate where their hits are. Down here, it says it says Orkine, which is AR Crimea. So this is somewhere just a little bit west of Sevastopol, near to one of the villages, I think a little bit further north up on the coast, kind of around Kacha or Belbek airfield. So this little coastal patrol boat, which is right here, this is the Project 10410 right here. This is the patrol boat that is largely conducting some limited air defenses and also anti-surface drone interdictions around the area of Sevastopol. They don't have a significant drone defense net around Sevastopol, even still to this day, but this is probably one of the most well-armed drone defenses that they have in the city, is in this patrol boat. They have a few of these. There's not a large number of them. I think there's only about 3 or 4 of them in Sevastopol right now, but they are pretty much the vanguard of sea-based drone attacks on Sevastopol and attempting to try and either shoot them down or try and slow their progress, or at least cut down the number of incoming drones that the city's actual air defenses will have to deal with. It looks like today, though, its number was drawn, and the Ukrainians decided that instead of this thing trying to defend the city was going to have to try and defend the ship.
Man, look at all that smoke coming out of the back of it. It's like an old pickup truck or something like that is like pouring smoke out of the back. It looks like some kind of junky ship, like with all that smoke.
Yeah, it's a pretty crappy one. This, also, by the way, folks, this is the Russian Coast Guard, but generally it falls under the authority, especially in the military occupation zone of Crimea, largely as a force of the Russian Navy, so it falls under a centralized sea command for the Russian armed forces, which is why I'm calling it a Russian Navy vessel for the purpose of this video. On top of that, it is involved in combatant operations, so it largely is a part of their maritime forces. But a pretty crappy junker, I'm not going to lie. But we can see here the Ukrainian drone coming on in, getting ready to grill it.
Man, they're about to grill the hell out of it. Look, also, by the way, is this footage sped up or is this the normal speed of it? That boat's actually kicking up some speed.
Let me look at that here real quick. I think this is the normal speed. That thing is absolutely boating. Look at that.
That thing is going fast, man. I think that they got that thing at like full speed or something. It's creating a crazy wake.
Let's see. Let me go pull this up here really quickly. It's the project. Let me go make sure.
I wonder if they knew they were being chased, because it seems abnormal for it to be going that fast. Like just doing a patrol. That seems kind of weird.
So what's interesting for you, here's some interesting facts for everyone here about this ship. These ships were built from 1987 to the present day, with the first one going into commission in 1988, meaning that this class is as old as the Soviet Union. It actually was put into service before the fall of the Berlin Wall, crazily enough. Right now, there's only about 33 of these active in the entirety of the Russian Coast Guard and the Russian Navy, as the Russian Navy does also operate these directly as well, under the Department of the Coast Guard, which is a sub-department of the Russian Navy, and we also understand that its top speed is 32 to 37 miles per hour.
That's pretty quick right there, but it's not normal for them just to go full speed, I would imagine. Like they got to be going full speed for a reason, or do they patrol like that normally, going this fast?
Generally not. It's considered to be an exorbitant use of fuel, and considering that Crimea is going through fuel shortages right now, that's pretty damn fast, and that's going to be consuming a great deal of fuel to keep the engines at that kind of a rev, to be able to keep this thing going at the speed. So I would assume that they were apparently getting alerts either to their ship or from some other units nearby, that there were drones in the air, and they kicked up the speed to try and make it a little bit more difficult to hit them, and to also make sure that they might be able to maneuver if anything was coming at them. Although it didn't really look to do them any good. I mean, we're watching them get blown up right now.
Yeah, Russian on the run. That's what I was assuming. I was assuming they probably kicked it up to full speed because they thought they were being chased. But it's like you're not going to outrun the drone. Like these things are going way faster than that ship. But it seems like the Russian Navy is getting slammed left and right. We just saw another one get hit in dry dock. Literally last night on the stream, we saw it get hit. Now we're seeing a patrol boat getting smacked while it's literally speeding through the water. So this is not a good sign for them.
Man, honestly, it is not. Also, you'd see the actual exhaust, that stuff you're talking about, like, damn, that stuff looks nasty. You could see it just shooting out of the side of the exhaust vent right here at the back of the ship. I mean, look at that. It's like a roaring inferno.
That thing is hauling ass so much it's literally got flames coming out the exhaust pipes on the side of the ship. This thing is like trying to get the hell out of there.
Man, they had this thing boosting on nitrous to try and get moving. And we can also see here in the last seconds when the drone was about to hit the ship, that some of the crew members up on deck started to try and make a run for it. But this guy actually looks to have run into the path of the drone trying to escape it.
Yeah, kind of. It looks like he did.
Oh, and a direct hit on the superstructure. Now they're starting to go for the targets elsewhere. This one actually in the Kherson Oblast. Once again, some of the air defenses that are currently operational leading up to Crimea and also towards the areas of Sevastopol, Simferopol, Dzhankoy, and also let me think here, what is the name of it? Oh, dang, I can't think of the air base that's on that one coastal town north of Sevastopol. It's not Kacha or Belbek, but there's one a little bit further north than that. But we can see them hitting the pantsers here and knocking those out. We can also see that they're continuing to hit and destroy the Pantsir battery here in the Kherson Oblast. This one already cooked up quite nicely. Actually, it looks like there's nothing... Oh my god, there's nothing left of it. It's literally just a pile of debris.
Damn, man, that's bad.
Man, that is really bad. That's horrendous, actually. That's rough. We see here the drone coming in on another radar system. This one's apparently the outdoor grill that's been turned into a radar. But they did blow it up successfully. We can then see that in the Crimean Peninsula, they also conducted an attack on a mainline freight train, which appears to be hauling, unfortunately, can't really tell you off the top of my head. It looks like it's some sort of fuel tanks. Actually, I can't tell y'all what those are. Those aren't fuel tanks. The closer up they got, they kind of look like boxcars. It might be some sort of ammunition, provisions, or shipments, but it doesn't, we can't really say for certain because it's really hard to tell because of this infrared imagery.
This is that famous train heist that all those other YouTubers were talking about, except there was no heist, it was just simply destruction.
Man, honestly. And we see them hitting it again right there as well. And now we can see them also going for a K2. Once again, oh well, this is a substation, by the way, in the Crimean area.
They call this the Great Russian Ego Heist. That's the only thing that got stolen that night was the ego of the Russians.
Man, and you could tell because the bots be coming out in numbers.
Man, I tell you what, they got those bot farms active. I wonder if these attacks right here we're seeing on the video had anything to do with Putin feeling angry today about Zelensky and questioning whether or not Zelensky was the leader of Ukraine. I wonder if this led to that frustration.
You know, that's a good question. That's a great question. I'd actually have to disagree, though. I don't think it was the attacks from today. I think it was the attack from yesterday. Because before we show y'all everything else that happened in Sevastopol, which certainly has to just do more so with the situation with the fuel shortage and the fuel crisis that's now gripping the peninsula, we have to bring y'all up to St. Petersburg for another part of the Russian naval saga. I think this is the one that ended up getting him pissed off more than the attack from today. Many of y'all will remember that yesterday we had satellite photography and direct footage from the Ukrainian Armed Forces showing that one of their drones ended up impacting the Staragushi-class corvette, the Boyki, in this dry dock right here on the eastern side of the Kronstadt Naval Wharf. Today, we have been able to get footage on the ground, and I'm telling you, 4K Ultra HD footage of what that actually looked like from Kronstadt. Don't know how this happened. I want to make this clear, but there were apparently civilians around the dry dock that were in the middle of the naval wharf, which in America this would never be permitted or allowed, so I was completely shocked that this even existed. But they actually filmed the Boyki in the direct aftermath of the two strikes on the ship, on fire and the superstructure appearing to be warping under the heat of the flames. Here is the clip showing the Boyki on fire in Ultra 4K HD. Notice the debris that's already scattered around the dry dock from the impacts, giving a little bit of the idea of the force in which the drones hit and exploded onto the ship, which already sent parts of the steel superstructure flying out into the wide open around the dry dock. Now, without further ado, here's the clip.
Oh my god. Oh. Holy crap. Man, look at that. The whole, the mast is literally hanging off the side of the ship right there. That apparently took a direct hit.
Yeah, it took a direct hit. Actually, from what we know, the first drone that hit the ship actually hit the basically anchor of the mast on the superstructure, and apparently the force of the explosion was so strong, the mast came over, apparently to the port side of the ship, and is now leaning over into the rest of the dry dock. So we can already confirm just by the force of this thing coming on over and crashing down into the top of the superstructure that generally the superstructure has taken significant damage at this point, and also the sail, which is what the mast of the ship is called, has also been completely removed from the vessel and is really just hanging on by a tether for the larger part. Also, I gotta say, this one Russian Navy soldier right here that went running by the camera, I bet you this is probably the worst day of his career right now.
Yeah, probably so. Seeing it from this HD view from the dock, though, I now understand why they had so many Russian fire trucks out here with hoses on this situation. It looks like the entire mast collapsed in the ship. It looks like the ship took an interior hit to it as well. And go back to the ship real quick. Get back to that angle. There's literally fires all over the part of the ship right there. It looks like it might have penetrated into the main part of the ship.
Oh, it definitely did. From what we can tell, the whole of the upper decks in the superstructure were burned clean through from this fire, from the aftermath of the satellite photography and also the Ukrainian hits, and apparently how deep the fire had already gotten into the ship after the first strike. It appears that the superstructure is completely destroyed. To also show y'all where this camera angle is at to explain a couple of things, we can actually see one of the gantryways for one of the cranes right here, and we can also see this brick building off to the farther right side of the screen. If we go and look right here, that would actually line up exactly with the cameraman standing about right here. This brick building, or largely the brick facade that we see on the right side of the video, would be this support structure right here next to the dry dock, and they're starting to look outwards and towards Kronstadt Harbor when they're looking towards that crane, which you can also see in the satellite photograph right here. So that's to give us a little bit of a point of view or a reference, meaning, to give a correction here to what I was saying just a moment earlier, we aren't actually viewing this from the port side of the ship. We're actually looking at the starboard side of the ship, because considering that the ship is facing outwards towards the front of the dry dock and towards the open water, and this cameraman is actually seeing that the mast of the ship, or the sail of the vessel, has actually ended up collapsing and then falling to the starboard side of the ship, not the port side. But to continue the rest of the clip, we'll show that right here.
Also, by the way, I see Shadow Knight here saying in the live chat, he said, why was the explosion so bad? It looks like more damage than an FPV drone could do to the ship. And also, why did they hit the particular part of the ship, like the ammo stores, etc.? So I believe they used a larger drone than an FPV to hit the ship. I'm pretty sure they used a larger style, like Shahed size drone to hit it. That's what I'm currently understanding. And I guess they hit the easiest part, which was obviously the mast. That was the easiest part to hit. It was at the very top of the ship, and they must have just thought that was good enough, because how many drones were going toward this target right here? How many actually got through? Do we know?
We know that 2 hit the ship.
Do we know how many in total went this direction? Because that's a key detail.
Unfortunately, we don't. All we can confirm is that 2 hit, and outside of that, the numbers become a blur.
Interesting. So I would assume that the few that got through, since we do know that 2 hit it, they probably just went for the easiest thing, which was the sitting duck, which was the mast at the top of the ship. They probably didn't get too picky with the target. They just simply wanted to hit it before they got shot down by Russian small arms fire. That's my guess.
I would suppose that's most likely the case, but we do have to understand, folks, that the explosive mass of one of these drones is pretty significant. We did get to see them blow up on the oil tanks nearby as well, and their singular explosions without creating oil fires or significant. So we would assume that the amount of explosives on board is probably these days around, once again, somewhere to 50 to 100 pounds, which doesn't really sound like a whole lot when you think about that on its own, but we have to remember that modern Russian naval vessels, like any other modern naval vessel on the planet, are designed with paper-thin armor, and they're not designed to take a hit. Modern vessels are designed around the concept of active defenses, stopping them from being directly hit. That's why battleships are obsolete, because putting all of that armor on a ship and decreasing its speed, when in reality, any munition that hits a ship these days is most likely going to be hitting it on its upper deck or directly along the side above the armor belt, is going to make that kind of concept completely useless, and therefore the expensive capital ships are largely obsolete, meaning that any vessel developed or deployed in the modern day, like destroyers, frigates, or corvettes, they have quite literally no armor to speak of, meaning that a 50-pound explosive or a 100-pound explosive hitting on the side of the superstructure or blowing up through the roof downwards is going to cause a humongous amount of damage to the vessel because it has quite literally no armor at all. And we can see here that that definitely was the case. The explosion appears to have penetrated deep into the vessel and had already started a pretty significant fire. Also, to give you all another point of orientation, that part right here is actually the bridge. So we can see smoke venting from the bridge as well, showing that the bridge was already being thoroughly burned through by the time of this video. We see them once again.
You know what? I just realized something. I think the ship might be toast.
Honestly, it is a complete write-off. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It is done for.
Yeah, I think so. And why was it in dry dock? Is it a new construction or is it being retrofitted or something?
Generally, from what we know for the Boyke, apparently it was like some sort of like maintenance or inspection or possibly a refit or just like standard repairs. Usually ships actually have to go into dry dock a decent bit just to have random maintenance conducted on them, like the Gerald R. Ford's about to have because of that laundry room fire. But this is one of those things of bringing the ship back in from, say, some sort of a patrol, or it's gone through a certain amount of its service life, like a year or two, and then they bring it back into the dry dock to do an inspection, do checks, and repair anything that might have broken since the last time it was serviced. So basically, it's like a car servicing, but for a ship.
Yeah, I guess that makes it easy for Russia. The work just got a lot easier for the inspectors. I would say it has a 0 out of 100 at this point, zero score.
Yeah, I'd agree. Also, once again, to show you a couple of more points of references here, to give you all an idea of what we're looking at, this is the Staragushi class corvette. This is actually the namesake of the class, the Staragushi, which you can see right here. If you look at this, this is actually very telling. This is actually very interesting here. Notice this large bulbous radome here that's a part of the larger sail is also sticking out towards the camera person. If you look at the normal Staragushi, that's a part of the larger element of the sail and superstructure, and that radome is supposed to be well up above the deck. That means whatever the fire has done, it is either warped or completely eroded the structural integrity right above the bridge, and this entire area above the bridge has collapsed and fallen backwards and towards the starboard side of the vessel. And we also can't see that rearward sail either. That appears to also be missing as well, showing that the fire may have warped the steel there as well and led to that either falling inwards into the upper decks of the superstructure, or it also just ended up sinking into the superstructure where we can no longer see it. But that's giving us a clear indication. I mean, if any indication was needed, the decks inside the ship from the heat of the fire have either warped or completely given way, meaning that everything in the superstructure has been gutted as a result of the fire. Actually, correction here, we can actually see that back sail right there. I didn't see that when I was first talking about this, but the main sail did completely collapse. So moving us on out of that, a lot of people are wondering, what is the purpose of Ukraine conducting these sorts of attacks against the Russian Navy and the Russian coastal defense forces? And not only that, like we saw in Sevastopol, the Russian air defenses within that area as well. I would say that there's a larger design and intention behind that, but Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so clearly Ukraine's ramping up their strikes against Sevastopol, which is the home to the Russian Navy of the Black Sea Fleet. We're now seeing that patrol vessels are being hit also near Crimea, and we also saw the one that we just got done watching on the video, another Russian warship in the dry dock, also getting destroyed as well. It's a total write-off, as you could tell in the video. So why do you think this stuff is happening, and is there a reason why Ukraine's going for the Navy in such large numbers right now? So 36% said Ukraine is simply trying to demoralize Russia by taking out their ships one by one, while 31% said Ukraine's trying to stop missile attacks that could be launched from some of these vessels, and 26% said Ukraine's prepping to hit the Kerch Bridge. And I would say on this really doesn't pertain to the Kerch Bridge a whole bunch because these vessels are generally in Sevastopol and they're not really near the Kerch Strait. So it's a little bit of a different spot. So I would say generally the reason why they're doing this, it's largely easy targets. It's demoralizing the Russians. And of course, I guess in the long-term scheme of things, it is taking some more ships out of action that Russia could use to defend against any further Ukrainian drone attacks on Crimea. So it's probably just normal operations and attacks. And also, of course, there's not really much defenses for these patrol ships, so they're simple, easy targets, and you could tell they couldn't outrun the drones either. They were going at full speed with flames coming out the exhaust, and they still couldn't outrun the drone. So I think that's probably the reason. I'm with the 36%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be generally with the idea. Let's see here. I would actually have to say that I don't really fall within any of these groups, in my honest opinion, because I think that the attacks were actually intended for larger strategic aims and goals in one form or another, with the St. Petersburg attacks being more indirect in their form on what they're trying to achieve, which is more of an abstract sort of a concept. And then with Sevastopol, it's more so direct in trying to whittle down the defenses that are seen leading up to Sevastopol city. Ukraine's attack and their footage that they showed from the last day around the area is giving us a clear indication that they are trying to destroy drone air defense forces like the Pantsir S-1s in Kherson and the naval patrol vessel outside of Sevastopol for a clear reason. And the only reason that that could be, considering that everything that was involved that got hit was some form of an air defense force, is that they're planning on a larger attack either on Sevastopol or Simferopol, which are in close enough proximity that those attacks on air defenses would be opening up both of those cities to be targeted. There is still a significant amount of military infrastructure that the Russian Federation uses and operates inside of Sevastopol, including the air bases at Belbek and Kacha just to the north of the city, and also within the Sevastopol naval yards as well, which are incredibly vast and are still used pretty decently even in the present day by the Russian Navy. That would lead me to believe that that is probably more so an attack to prepare and open up the airspace for future drone and missile attacks that Ukraine will possibly be conducting. As far as the St. Petersburg attack, that one generally falls under a different parameter. The Baltic Fleet has never been used to conduct a missile attack against the state of Ukraine, meaning that destroying a vessel of that nature and of that type generally serves no larger strategic purpose immediately in the war in Ukraine. However, what it does do is that it starts to decrease the available amount of ships and also the cost that Russia has to undertake to either repair these damaged or destroyed vessels, and also, importantly, it cuts down on their force projection capabilities in the Baltic, which would be absolutely vital for them to try and conduct a blockade of the Baltics if they begin a larger war with NATO, to be able to try and give their fighting forces at least a fighting chance of trying to make some significant ground in the Baltic states before some sort of a negotiated ceasefire was made between the two sides. And I think that that's largely starting to work in an indirect sense to get into the Russian minds that not only is Ukraine slamming the Russian Federation directly in the conflict, but Ukraine is also going to start whittling down Russia's strategic power projection capabilities outside of the Ukrainian theater, which will also be jeopardizing the Russian strategic position and might put more pressure on the Russian Federation to possibly consider some sort of a negotiation with the state of Ukraine that will be somewhat amicable or slightly favorable, although that definitely isn't going to be happening, but that might be the intention behind the St. Petersburg attack and the strike on the Boyki. But moving us on out of the Boyki Doiki up there in Kronstadt, we are going to be moving ourselves on into Moscow, speaking of that possible peace deal that we're hearing of right now. And apparently we have a breaking news coming out at this moment. And Matthew, what do we got?
Okay. Also, by the way, a big shout out to Scott in the live chat who sort of alerted me to this breaking news right here. But we are hearing some breaking news possibly coming out of the Middle East right now. And of course, this is a very, very early report. So take this as you will. This came out 8 minutes ago, and it's being claimed that Oman has just suspended crude oil loading at one of their key export terminals following a major explosion that just happened. They're saying that apparently at the Mina Al Fahal terminal, there was apparently a large explosion near one of the mooring berths at the port, and they're saying that it occurred between 1 and 2 berths at the port, of course, and it was due to an alleged drone attack, but they're not saying where it came from right now. So it sounds like there's been an attack on Oman, but we don't know exactly who's at fault as a result of that attack, but apparently a large explosion. I haven't really seen too many reports coming out about it, except for 1 or 2 preliminary reports for some mainstream outlets. So we'll have to see, but that could be a big situation breaking out right now.
That's very interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on that, and that might be a possible Iranian attack. So we'll be making sure to provide y'all with any additional information and evidence that we have on that situation right now. But it sounds like a very interesting development inside of the kingdom, or the Sultanate of Oman. But moving us on out of that breaking news, and moving us on into our next major news, we've actually heard that Poland is now declaring what it appears to almost be becoming an indefinite closure of their airspace on their eastern borders. Over the course of the day, Poland has declared that a large strip of airspace is going to be shut down for civilian air traffic due to state security concerns. You can actually see this declared area right here, also covered with the red X's, which is completely shutting down the airspace, at least about 10 to 15 miles into Poland, on the Belarusian border and also on the Ukrainian border as well. We generally believe that this action is being made at the moment because of the tense situation that exists with the Russian Federation and the possibility that Russia could conduct a similar drone attack on Poland as they did on Romania, and they're trying to clear out the airspace in this area to give themselves a buffer zone to where they can engage and shoot down incoming threats before they're able to cause significant damage, casualties, or fatalities in Polish citizenry, Polish cities, and directly affect the Polish citizenry as a result. So it does appear that the Polish are one of the first countries that we've seen that's now declared an exclusionary zone around the very outer edge of their airspace bordering Belarus and Ukraine, and that they're going to be trying to use this to give themselves some time to be able to shoot down incoming drone threats within the area. Moving us on out of that interesting information in Poland, we do have a lot of additional information as well that's been coming out of Russia. But before we move on into that, I do want to see what people are thinking right now about the Polish airspace closure that has just been announced today and is going to be ongoing for a significantly long amount of time. At this month right now, up until I believe September, and there's a high likelihood that it's going to be extended from there. So Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so that's a very big move because Poland has now basically closed its complete border airspace with Belarus. And of course, we've been hearing Zelensky and even European sources say that they have intelligence reports indicating that Belarus could get dragged into the war very soon by Vladimir Putin inside of Ukraine. So now we're seeing Poland take the step of literally closing the border, basically, of airspace. So that's a big deal. So what do you think is really happening? 58% said it's to prevent Russian drone incursions from Belarusian airspace, while 27% said Poland's worried about a Belarus attack on Polish territory, and 11% said it sounds serious, but we need more info. So the big deal about this is it's not a temporary closure. It'll be lasting until at least September, which is also generally the timeline that Zelensky gave that Belarus could be doing something to aggress either against Ukraine or aggress against NATO. So that's sort of an ominous sign that Poland's apparently taking that very seriously. And of course, we've heard Zelensky say again today that Belarus is going to get drug in at some point. So at this point, I'm really having a hard time with the argument that Belarus isn't going to get involved in some way or another, but I still really don't believe that Belarus would attack Poland directly. That would be wildly insane, to say the least. I'd have to see that to believe it. But I do believe that Belarus would allow Russia to attack Ukraine from their territory. So I'm with the 58%. I think it's to prevent Russian drone incursions in case Belarus gets involved. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say that I'm also the 58% as well. I think that it's largely to prevent Russian drone incursions and also to give themselves an area of response time. Airspace closures are always conducted, especially in these sorts of instances, to clear out an area and create a secured perimeter so that way if anything enters that airspace, you can largely be certain that it is not friendly, it is some sort of a hostile combatant, and then you can shoot it down and destroy it. And that's what the Polish are trying to do with this right now. So regardless of what's going to be happening in the future, it is clear to me, at least at this point, that the Polish are shutting down this area of their airspace, and quite a decent amount of it, to be able to try and give themselves a defensive perimeter to shoot down incoming air threats in without it making it to major cities in Poland and possibly causing mass casualty incidents like we've seen in other countries. Kuwait yesterday. But moving us on out of that, we have also been able to hear of some very interesting news inside of Moscow. And there is something very interesting here, very interesting going on in Moscow right now. The President of the United States has stepped in on the Ukraine situation. And we all know that only good things come from situations like that. And he has stated that both sides would have to make compromises to end the war. That's a very profound statement to make. Meeting in the middle, I think that's what that's called. It's a pretty old saying, new one, generally, just came up with it. But generally, that's what that's called, is meeting in the middle, making some compromises. So Zelensky said that they would be willing to start negotiations right now at the front lines. And that means starting at the front lines, they would negotiate from there, meaning that Russia is not going to de facto get any more ground and Ukraine isn't going to reclaim ground. They're just going to negotiate it as it sits right now. So then Putin's response is that they did receive the information that Zelensky wanted to talk about a possible peace. Once again, I do have to remind everyone, Putin stated today, once the president said that he'd be all for peace and he loves peace. And then that's when Zelensky countered, we could just start talking and negotiating at the front lines right now and declare a ceasefire. So the Russians made it clear, for one, that a ceasefire is not necessary for negotiations to begin. And he signals that Moscow sees no need to halt hostilities as a precondition for talks with Ukraine. Because according to Putin, they're winning on the front. And so there's no reason to stop the conflict with a ceasefire, because then that would give the Ukrainians some time to turn the whole situation around. Mind you all, the Ukrainians have retaken, just to mention a couple of their frontline gains in the past few months, they've retaken the entire city of Kupiansk, they pushed the Russians back out of Torskay and back into the Seberonsky forest, they've held them at Konstantinivka, they've stopped them completely in Pokrovsk, they've retaken ground on the Novopavlivka front, and they've also pushed the Russians back on the southern front near to Kamyansky and Stepove as well. Just to mention that, by the way. So the Russians are losing ground in every part of the front line that you can think of, except for the area where they're fighting the hardest in Pokrovsk, and there, every day, they're just breaking even at a stalemate. And Putin claims that they're gaining ground, the Russians are, and so there's no reason for a ceasefire, because the Ukrainians are going to use that to give themselves a better fighting position once the ceasefire ends, because clearly the Ukrainians will negotiate in bad faith, according to Putin. Also, we were able to hear that Putin then stated that the Iran war has shifted U.S. attention from Ukraine, so there really isn't a reason to slow down the war, because the U.S. isn't really caring that much and supporting Ukraine that great of a deal to make the Russian position untenable, and the Russians now believe that because the U.S. has went and gone somewhere else, the Middle East, that they'll be able to continue on this war and eventually win it against Ukraine due to a lack of U.S. support. Then, what's even crazier, this is the nuts one, they then stated today, and this is the one that we've heard for a while, that Zelensky is not even a legitimate government official, and he's not even the president of Ukraine, and that matter should be decided by lawyers inside of Russian courts.
Bruh. And that's the arrogance, by the way. Like when I read that earlier today, I was thinking not only is Putin a bastard, but also he's extremely arrogant. It's like what right does Russia have? Like even in this wacko world that Putin lives in what world does another country tell
Panama
another
City
one
Beach.
that their official that they've elected is legitimate or not? It's like that's up to that country to decide that. That's not up to a foreign country to say, oh, well, they're legitimate or they're not. It's like if he's in charge, he's the guy you negotiate with. That's the end of the story right there. That's arrogant beyond belief.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And this is also suggesting, folks, that according to the Russian government, and this is what they've had as a position for a while, but this is clearly showing they still don't want a legitimate peace with Ukraine. They've stated continuously through the war that Zelensky's government is an illegitimate government. The Ukrainian governmental system and Ukrainian constitution is an illegitimate constitution for an illegitimate nation, and that the state of Ukraine does not even exist. That's been the Russian negotiating position for the entirety of the war, is that we're not even going to talk to the Ukrainian government unless if they unconditionally surrender, because we don't even view their authority and sovereignty on the territory of Ukraine to be a legitimate one worthwhile of negotiating with. And then after all of that, Putin then stated, mind you all that he just said that Zelensky is a criminal leader, that if Zelensky wants to meet Putin, he can come to Moscow.
Oh, that picture right down there below, that's perfect right here. He went from being the rat to being the clown, by the way. You know, that's crazy. Honestly, that's really actually very fitting right there. But yeah, it's like the Russians have been saying that's like what leader in a time of war is going to deliver themselves into the custody of the other enemy country that they're fighting against in the midst of a war? It's like obviously the Russians are going to take Zelensky prisoner. I mean, it's very clear they're going to do that. And that's why they keep inviting him to Moscow, is because they know that Zelensky is definitely not insane. He's not going to show up and deliver himself into their prison. So, I mean, that's insane.
It's absolutely nuts. It's unbelievable. And the fact that the Russians are saying this, folks, they're basically saying Zelensky needs to show up to Moscow so we can basically arrest him on the spot because we claim that he's a criminal leader of an illegitimate nation with no sovereignty that we're at war with right now. That's basically their position. That would be like, you know, in World War II, for example, like FDR said something like, well, you know, we consider the German government. Actually, you know what? This would be a better one. It would be like Germany in World War II saying, we consider the British government to be an illegitimate government that is full of shit, but if Churchill wants to surrender, he can fly to Berlin. It's like, clearly he's not going to say yes to that, and he's never going to fly to Berlin. That'd be stupid. Like, you would have to be an idiot to follow through with that. And so the entire Russian, oh yes, we love peace, sort of the people of the dove thing, fell apart literally within an hour because Zelensky challenged it upright with the most amenable terms that could be given, and the Russians immediately backed out of all of that completely and said, Zelensky's illegitimate, the Ukrainian state isn't even real, he's probably a criminal, also he can come to Moscow. I mean, they came up with every excuse under the sun to actually not negotiate.
Yeah, and I wonder why the Russians suddenly had this bone of peace in their body. Like all of a sudden, Putin is back to this peace talk out of the blue. I wonder why that is, because just yesterday they were saying they were going to wipe out the Ukrainian government with Restraining missiles. So now all of a sudden today they want peace. And Enforcer, show us the reason why they suddenly want peace in this post.
Well, it's because, folks, the president said, like we already covered before, that certain compromises have to be made by both sides to end the war. So the president's back on paying attention to Ukraine for a minute. I guess, you know, he got tired of waffling in the Middle East, so he decided to go to something where, you know, he can just make a statement and it doesn't really mean much of anything. So the president's putting pressure back out there again to try and make a peace deal, and that's the only reason that we've seen that Putin is now once again acting like they want a peace. Once the president stops paying attention to this, which will probably be in 2 days, the Russians will be back to, we want unconditional surrender, we're not stopping the war until 2036, we'll even go to 2050 to see that this thing is concluded successfully.
Oh, yeah. And they've already done that today, like telling Zelensky to come to Moscow. That's basically giving Zelensky the middle finger to a large degree, because he's not going to go to Moscow, and he shouldn't. That would be absolutely stupid to do that. So I will say this: we can go ahead and if we can go ahead and get into this. Zelensky put out an open letter right after all this stuff happened earlier today, and Putin was like, "Oh, we want peace. We're just a peace-loving country because the U.S. president said so. We're peace-loving." He put out an open letter, Zelensky did, and he pretty much ruined the entire Russian position with his open letter right here, which is a pretty masterful move, I will say.
Yeah, it was a pretty masterful move, and also in that letter as well, he stated that if the Russians are trying to drag Belarus into the war, Ukraine will have to respond accordingly, which generally means that Ukraine is going to go even harder on Russia with their attacks, and will also start going up against Belarus as well. So not really a good position for the Russians. They pretty much got proven to be full of crap and flat-out liars like they always have been over the course of just a couple of hours today, once Zelensky called their bluff and said it for what it was, which is that they're not legitimately looking for a peace. They're calling unconditional surrender a peace, which is not a peace, and that's not a compromise. That's nothing. That's basically the Russians saying, we want to win the war, and we're going to keep the war going until we get what we want, or you can just surrender right now. That's the choices. That's clearly not a compromise, like the president's saying. Now, how is the president going to react to it? Who knows? Probably is going to start blaming Ukraine for the whole war again, although Zelensky just showed it's not the Ukrainians that are the problem, it's the Russians that are the problem. but we'll have to see how that eventually goes here in the near future. But a lot of people are wondering, why in the world did Putin and the Russian government say that if Ukraine wanted to end the war, Zelensky has to come to Moscow? What are people thinking about that, Matthew? How many people think that that would be a trap for Zelensky, and how many people are thinking it's not a trap?
Okay, so of course, Putin started this whole fake narrative today about wanting peace, even though he's literally ramping up the war until 2036, which is insane. But Zelensky must come to Moscow if he wants to talk. Putin doesn't apparently understand the concept of having a mediator discuss the talk, so he wants the enemy country, which is Zelensky in his view, to come straight to the enemy's capital and deliver himself, which is also insane. So what are your thoughts? What's really going on here? 50% said Putin is simply trying to get Zelensky. That's why he's up to, while 39% said Putin is just playing U.S. officials, and 7% said Putin really wants to end the war. And I am very confidently with the 39%. Putin is doing this purely to play the U.S. officials. He's also given the U.S. officials a narrative to run with that Ukraine is the troublemaker and Putin is the one who wants peace and Ukraine's holding out the process. We already know that clown show already sailed a long time ago. And it got so bad, it got so pointless that the U.S. even bowed out of the talks that they literally started between Ukraine and Russia. It got that bad. So it sounds to me like the games are getting restarted again for the most part, but Zelensky's open letter largely put that door shut today because the open letter said, we're willing to talk about ending the war now. We'll even start negotiations at the current front lines, which I was shocked Zelensky said that, by the way, but he said he would negotiate starting at the current front lines, and Putin said what? He said come to Moscow, which is the big middle finger to Zelensky. So clearly Putin doesn't want peace right there. And also, by the way, Putin's whole allegation about the U.S. isn't really focused on Ukraine anymore is also bogus because today in the House of Representatives, they just passed an $8 billion Ukraine aid package that it'll probably get vetoed by the president, but they passed it nonetheless, which indicates there's still an appetite for support for Ukraine in the United States, and they haven't completely forgotten about it, regardless of what people were saying. So I'm with the 39%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd say that he's certainly trying to play U.S. officials. Getting Zelensky doesn't really matter much at all. He's trying to play the U.S. to make it look like, oh no, Russia loves peace. It's Ukraine that's the problem. See, we love peace. We'd be willing to talk about it. It's just that they have to unconditionally surrender. And that's what they're trying to do right now, is just basically game the United States. Now, as far as the president vetoing Ukraine support, I don't really know if he would. Well, generally these days you can't put anything past him, but I would say that he probably wouldn't, because if there's enough support in the House and the Senate to get that to the president's desk and then he vetoes it, I don't really think that's going to be going over well with most of the U.S. public, especially considering that, we've got the entire thing, just to look at the situation in its whole. We've got the whole disaster going on in the Middle East right now, which is clearly showing that the foreign policy image and ideals that the current president has is just an absolute crapshoot. And then in the midst of that, he's going to sabotage another situation in Europe when the Congress is trying to continue to provide support to Ukraine, which is another front that we're fighting on. So I don't know if he'd be willing to do that, because I'll be honest with y'all folks, I don't really think that'd be taken too well if he tried to veto that at that point, especially with what's going on in the Middle East and also what's going on elsewhere. So I don't know. Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. I would have to say I'd have to wait. But then again, there's always weird decisions made at the 13th hour for some reason.
I will say this. There was an interesting statement made today by the Secretary of State Rubio. He was out there saying today that he doesn't believe that Russia will generally meet their war objectives to a large degree, and that pissed the Russians off very bad earlier today. Lavrov, the horseman, who's Putin's right-hand man, basically, came out and said that this became not just Biden's war, but now it became Trump's war because of Rubio's comments today. So that pissed the Russians off quite a bit. But Rubio was correct. Russia's not going to achieve its frontline goals. It's simply not. And that's why the Russians are also planning out dragging the war out until 2036, which also seems to back up the idea that Russia knows they really can't achieve anything. They're simply trying to conduct a war of attrition and hope that Ukraine will eventually give up, which they won't, by the way. Plot twist, Ukraine's not going to give up. They haven't yet, and they never will. So it's going to drag on for ages. So I'm glad to see that they did pass that package. I think it's an $8 billion loan package that the U.S. passed, and there's like $1 billion in material support that would be immediate. So to me, it sounds pretty promising. Hopefully it gets through, and hopefully the president doesn't try to obstruct it.
I would agree. I would hope to see that kind of support and those sorts of bills are passed continuously like they were back in the day, again in the present, because it would be a significant help to the Ukrainians for them to get that kind of support. And also, I think that would be very beneficial for us strategically, because at this point, we really need to try and sell ourselves to the Ukrainians. It's not the Ukrainians having to sell themselves to us. We're kind of having to sell ourselves to them at this point, because we really need to get, if I'm being honest with y'all folks, we need to get a couple of their guys on a jet, fly them over to the United States, and have them at Fort Benning, and also Paris Island and whatnot, teaching the new doctrine of a new model army in the present day, with drone warfare being the new factor. If we don't have that kind of knowledge and that kind of expertise on the land war side of things, and also on the security side of things at this point for the Air Force and the Navy as well, we're going to end up being up the creek without a paddle. We've been saying that, well, we're already up the creek without a paddle, if we're being honest here. We've been saying that on this channel for years, because drone warfare has proven to be a significant game changer, tactically and strategically, for how a war is fought and how they can turn out. And we haven't really seen any significant evolutions in doctrine, at least in the United States and most Western countries, over the past several years, even in the face of what is a looming disaster militarily, which is the advent of drone warfare. We've even seen that countries that generally have been lauded as the cutting edge of Western fighting expertise and knowledge, the Israelis, getting their ass beat by a whole bunch of yokels with AKs in the hills of Lebanon with a couple of FPV drones, which is showing that the threat is quite permeable and existent. It is an imminent threat that we're facing right now in the present day. It's not something that's going to coalesce in the next few years. We're living in the drone age today, and we are still fighting on yesteryear's tactics like that would work against an opponent that's going to be fielding a large amount of drones. We've even seen that right now against Iran, using a limited amount of drones, that was easily able to overwhelm U.S. air defenses and also cause damage to U.S. forces and significant casualties, which we appear to have not factored for. But we actually have some breaking news coming out at this moment right now. So Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so we're going to jump back to the Middle East for a second, because remember, I broke the news earlier that there was apparently a big explosion at Oman's main export facility. We're currently seeing a pretty good bit of assets, U.S. assets, refueling tankers, etc., currently lurking around Dubai, which is also generally around the same spot as Oman. So check Flight Radar Live and see if they're still there, by the way. It looks like a lot of U.S. assets are potentially in the air. It could be fighter jets as well. That's usually what the Stratotankers are supporting, is usually fighter jets. So it looks like some of them have their transponders off. There's still a couple with their transponders on around the area, but yeah, I think there's some with their transponders off, because there was more in this picture right here than we're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot more of them out there. It's just that we really can't see them right now. A couple of them appear to actually be squawking their transponders over the UAE, and they're flying back to the Prince Sultan Air Base, apparently where they came from, which certainly suggests that there's combat aircraft in tow. There's a huge amount of them over at Prince Sultan. And apparently they flew out from Prince Sultan over the UAE and then into the area outside of Oman. Apparently, for some reason, I would assume at this point, folks, there's an active attack going on against Oman, and the U.S. Air Forces are present within this area to conduct some form of air defense or air screening against possible or still incoming threats that are being fired by the Iranians, because that would really be the only reason we would need combat aircraft and aerial tankers up and operational right now in the Gulf of Oman.
Could it be the United States that hit it? Because I know that sounds odd, but could it be the United States hitting the export terminal in Oman? Because just a few hours back, by the way, just for some context, Oman was generally kind of on the fence about the whole Strait of Hormuz situation, and the U.S. had already threatened to blow up Oman if they don't want to play ball. So I'm not sure. I'm not honestly totally convinced that it was the Iranians, to be perfectly honest. I think there's a small possibility it could have been a U.S. strike on that port.
I'm not sure, because generally we have a pretty favorable position with Oman, and threatening to bomb them was absolutely brain dead, considering that, Oman is not a non-American aligned country within the area. If anything, it's fairly amicable to us and neutral, for that matter, at the worst case scenario. So threatening to bomb them and then bombing them would be turning them into an unfriendly state at a minimum and a hostile state at the worst case scenario.
It just seems kind of weird, though, because, earlier today, here's what I heard earlier today, just to give everybody some more detail about this, what I was talking about. Oman reportedly rejected the U.S. pressure to sever contacts with Iran, and they said that their discussions with Iran that Oman's currently holding about the Strait of Hormuz and the management of the strait is completely lawful, and they'll keep talking with Iran. So I'm not totally sure if maybe the U.S. decided to follow through with that wild threat to attack Oman of all countries. That would certainly be a strange thing to do, but I wouldn't rule it out completely because it sounds like Oman's still not fully, playing ball with the United States from the looks of it, which is kind of weird, by the way, because, recently Oman was mediating the situation on behalf of Iran and the United States, and then we moved over to Pakistan after Oman generally wasn't making the U.S. officials very happy with that. So I don't know. Like, I'm saying there's a small chance of it. I'm definitely not saying this is the definite situation happening, but I wouldn't rule it out completely.
Well, I don't know, because, we do base U.S. forces in Oman. Oman was also attacked by Iran prior. And on top of that, when the USS Abraham Lincoln is operating around Oman or in the northern part of the Arabian Sea, there's always a small flight of Ospreys from the carrier that are hanging out, I believe, at Duqm on the Omani coastline and are ferrying supplies, perishable ones, to and fro from the carrier while it's operating. So I don't really think we bomb them, because then they'd be declaring our diplomats inside of their country persona non grata, and they would definitely be expelling our military forces, which at this point are conducting vital, or at least just routine supply operations for the carrier at sea.
Maybe. We'll just have to find out. But, it looks like some people are saying it's possible in the live chat. Some people are vehemently opposed to it. But we'll find out later. These days, folks, I know everybody's got these preset notions in their head, like, oh, that couldn't happen because of the X, Y, and Z. We can't predict anything anymore. Like, the fact that the U.S. even threatened Oman the other day was absolutely insane, the fact that they even did that. So I'm not ruling anything out because, statements like that being made, you have to take them at face value until we see otherwise.
Oh, there's a special flight squad, Antonov 124, from the Russians right now, flying back to Egypt.
Interesting. What's that about?
I don't know. I just saw that. Like, while you were talking, I was like, who the hell is that? Like, RFF. I was like, that's not an American call, so like an American sign or a symbol. And it appears to be a Russian Special Flight Squad aircraft. So don't know what that one's doing. That's actually a cargo aircraft as well. It's not a transport aircraft like the IL-76s that we've seen prior. So that's really interesting. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that one. Probably just the ferrying of personnel around the area, because this is something that isn't like unheard of. We've seen this a couple of times in the prior weeks, but we really don't know what they're doing, because they sometimes fly into Syria, usually to Tartus, then they fly down to Egypt, and then sometimes they end up flying to the UAE, or they end up flying to Somalia or somewhere else in this area, and then they go flying all the way back to Russia afterwards. And we don't really know what they're doing, spotting these flights all the time in the area and just dropping people off or picking them up or dropping off equipment. We're just not entirely sure, but that's interesting to note that that's happening in the midst of everything else going on in Oman. Not that they're related, it's just that we happen to catch that on air. But anyways, with that, I hope we have addressed that breaking news story the best we can. I would generally be of the belief, folks, that the U.S. didn't attack Oman because it would be absolutely brain dead to do something like that, because of the diplomatic position we have with them and the kind of fallout that would create. That definitely wouldn't be beneficial for us. But I also have to say, folks, that while I'm using common sense to measure our foreign policy actions, the current U.S. foreign policy considers common sense to be the last thing considered when making a decision. So they might have just been bombed by the United States. We don't really know. But we'll have to wait and see what comes out of Oman. But with that, I hope we've addressed that whole breaking news story the best we can and given our opinions on what may possibly be happening down on the ground. And moving us on from that, we have also been able to hear, moving us on out of Moscow, of another interesting thing that Russia said today outside of the Otabinsk test range. Many of y'all will know that the Kapustin Yar test range, which is near to the city of Otabinsk, was used by the Russian Federation to fire two Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missiles with hypersonic glide vehicles at the state of Ukraine. From what we understand, one of those hit at the town of Belozerivka, which is incredibly close to the city of Kyiv, and then we heard that another one ended up landing somewhere just south of Orlivka and north of Donetsk. Right now, we have not really been able to get a good answer as to why that IRBM fell on occupied Russian territory, and we've generally believed here, folks, that it is some sort of a critical systems failure that led to that sort of an issue. The Russians, however, have stated otherwise, and they have stated that it was a pre-planned failure. As far as the system, according to Putin, as for our new systems, they are emerging, including the Oreshnik system. But this is somewhat different from what we were doing in the past before the conflict in Ukraine. What do I mean? We've tested similar systems at test ranges, but we haven't tested the Oreshnik, and that's not a combat deployment. We've practically never had a single combat use of the Oreshnik in the true sense of the word on the Ukrainian territory, and the last one is just...
Well, didn't they just fire it like in 2024 though at Ukraine? It's like, is that not a combat use?
They fired it in 2024, in 2025, and in 2026. So there's been 3 different incidents where they fired an Oreshnik at Ukraine. But according to Putin, they've never done it before.
Yeah, that's some bogus right there. Now he's trying to even cover up the fact they fired it before because it went so bad.
You know, like, man, this is what's about to get even crazier, folks. He then continues to say, to be honest, I'll reveal a major military secret. They simply struck where it was convenient to observe the results. Well, you know, firing into Russia then would be the easiest place to see the results because they have access to Russian territory. They don't have access to Belozerka. That's just stupid. This applies to Belozerka and even more so to the Donetsk People's Republic area within the main fortified area. Our drones then flew there into the barn they hit and simply observed how the deployable pods were positioned, measuring everything down to the millimeter. This is important for us in order to make future decisions about the full-scale use of the Oreshnik against designated targets, including in urban areas. This is a crock of shit. This is explaining away the complete failure of the Oreshnik as, oh, it actually meant for that to happen. Like, sure they did. Sure they did.
Yeah, they didn't mean it was a failure. That's what it was, and that's absolutely absurd to even say that. Literally, the Russians were saying that they were going to hit the Ukrainian decision-making centers right before they launched the Oreshnik, and Zelensky was sending out alerts all over the place talking about, you know, get ready to take cover. They could be about to do it. They're going to fire Oreshniks at us. Then Putin does it, and then Putin hits a shed in Belozerka. It's like, okay, so now the Russians are saying that was intentional. They meant to do that, even though they were literally saying they were going to hit the decision-making centers. They hit a shed instead in a nearby, you know, town. So I'm like, well, that's crazy work.
And I see some people saying, well, that actually kind of makes sense, Unga. I hope y'all are joking, because this makes absolutely no sense. If you wanted to see where the warheads would hit, why wouldn't they fire it into a Russian firing range in eastern Russia? Why wouldn't they do that? I mean, you can, like, they don't even need to fly a drone over whatever stupid excuse they're coming up with right now. They can literally just drive onto the impact site unimpeded and look at what it did there on a testing range. Because that's basically what they did on Ukraine. That'd be like us in America going, you know, that B-61 gravity bomb we have, we don't really know what that does. Let's just drop it on Poland and see what happens. Like, that would be the kind of insanity that this is. It's saying, let's drop a MIRV system on an allied territory, at least according to the Russians, to figure out what it does. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's like saying, damn, I wonder if this revolver's any good. Man, I had to go, like, do something nuts with it. It's like, you wouldn't do that in any reasonable mindset. That's absolutely insane. You go to, like, somewhere safe, like a target range or something like that. You wouldn't just go wandering out in the street and go, let me pop a couple of rounds off in the air and see if the pistol works. That's basically what the Russians are saying they did. Now, if y'all have not heard of a government that is that stupid before, you just heard of it today. I've never heard of a thing this dumb in my life of, well, we just wanted to see what it did, so we just fired it basically on our front lines where troops could have been to see what it would have done. Like, that's insane. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. The reality of it is, folks, is that the system had a critical failure mid-flight, and apparently, I'm guessing its motors failed, and so its trajectory ended up falling short, and it ended up landing somewhere in Donetsk as a result. That's what I'm thinking, because outside of that does not make any damn sense whatsoever. I mean, think it, like, you know, that'd be like in America. Like, here's a good example. That would be like the U.S. government going, wow, you know, I really want to know what that brand new JDAM we have does. Instead of dropping it on a test range in, like, Utah or something, we're going to drop it on New York City and just figure out what happens. Like, it's like, no one would do that. It's like, think about that, folks. It's insane. It's brainless of a statement, even. And that's just a BS claim. Unbelievable. It blows me away that claim was even made by Putin directly with a straight face. That's the clearest lie I've ever heard. But moving us on out of that whole bit of news, we do have to get through the rest of our Middle East news because we actually have some pretty interesting developments down here today. I didn't say they're good developments. They're interesting. I'll leave it at that. But before we get on into that, I do have to say a humongous thanks to every single person who has been enjoying the channel so far and has watched over the first hour and 11 minutes. We've been able to see that at the peak, 15.4 thousand people were here. and 65,000 people have watched this stream in a matter of 1 hour and 10 minutes. I've got to say that we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative to each and every single one of y'all so much once again for watching, and we still have a lot to go. A decent amount of interesting news that came out of the Middle East and also out of Ukraine as well that we haven't been able to get to so far today. But before we get on into all of that news, I do want to make sure to take a brief little pause here to answer a couple of questions from the chat. We're going to be taking 3 of them and then moving on into the rest of the news for the night. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so let's get into our first 3 super chats. Our first one here goes to none other than Con45, who puts in a $50 support. And thank you very much, Con, for always supporting the channel through all the months and even all the years. And we do appreciate that as well. And Con said, guys, the Zelensky to Putin open letter today was a Winston Churchill moment, and you guys must cover what was said in Zelensky's full letter. It is completely crushing Putin as a complete historical failure, so bad that Russian propagandists came and save Putin. And you guys.
So that is all the news we have for you tonight, y'all. We will be monitoring this momentarily. If we have any other news tonight, we will be back on with breaking news. If not, we will be back on tomorrow at 4:30 if we got breaking news. If we don't have any breaking news, we'll be back on for a daily news report at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. The phone lines will be closed now as soon as we go off air. Again, please drop a comment, drop a like, and if you're just now dropping in, please drop a follow and subscribe. Just trying to get the news out there. I do research on these guys a lot, so make sure that they're actually being truthful about all the stuff that they're saying. So, I mean, I've been watching these guys for a long time, and they're legit. But yeah, that's all the news we have for y'all tonight. We will be, like I said, we'll be back on tomorrow night or tomorrow evening, one of the two. If we have breaking news, we will be back on tomorrow evening. I hope y'all have a wonderful, safe night. Oh, before I forget, we will be having drawings coming up on the channels as soon as we get our goals met. So let's try to get this. Let's start sharing the channels, start sharing the videos, start on our platforms, on Facebook, social media, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever y'all got. Share it over there so we can actually get more of an audience in here, so we can get more people subscribed, and that more people subscribe, the faster we'll get to the drawings. We need 200 on Kick, 200 on Rumble, 200 on Twitch, and 500 on YouTube. So let's get it going, and